Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and here we are in the Bechtel Conference Center at PPIC. And Mark, am I correct? Is this the first public
The first public
gathering at the Bechtel Conference Center? So hey, let's just start off like that. This is a wonderful addition, obviously, to PPIC and to San Francisco, and we look forward to partnering with you folks on many events going forward. It's a beautiful space. I think you've done great service to the city by creating this. And the leadership of PIC is appreciated in that regard. Again, my name is Jim Wonderman. I'm the president and CEO of the Bay Area Council, and Bechtel actually was, Stephen Bechtel Sr. was one of the founders of the Bay Area Council back in 1945 with Governor Earl Warren and Henry Kaiser and folks of the time who were trying to figure out what to do about the Bay Area economy post-war, which was looming at the time. Obviously, they solved all the problems. They had it all thought out. We implemented all that stuff. No need for anything anymore, but actually did some good things, including bringing the first meeting of the United Nations to San Francisco back in 1945 at Herbst, and setting the stage for the creation of BART and many other things. So the council is a very proud organization, now about 66 years old. Our members are CEOs of some of the largest companies here in the region, virtually from all sectors, and we work on public policy issues, you name it, from education to transportation and renewable energy and water and resources and innovation, and certainly the focused all around the key issue that we're going to discuss tonight with Lieutenant Governor Newsom, which is the regions and the state's economy, and what can we do to preserve it and grow it and make the economy safe for the democracy that we have. So here's what we're going to do tonight is I will, in a moment, I'm going to introduce Jed Kalko, who I think most of you know, and Jed's the Associate Director and Research Director of PPIC, and he's going to be talking about PPIC's work in this area, I think, and he'll make some comments, and then I'll introduce Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, and he's going to talk about what's going on in California, what we can look forward to in the future, especially in terms of the economy, I think, and primarily we're going to book most of the time tonight to be a conversation between Mark Baldassare and Lieutenant Governor Newsom, and so it's going to be in that kind of format, and we think that'll be most interesting. So I'll come back in a moment to introduce Lieutenant Governor, but let me introduce for a moment Jed Kalko, PPIC's Associate and Research Director.
Thanks very much. We're delighted to have Lieutenant Governor here today. To set the context, I would like to give you the world's fastest overview of the California economy, where we are right now, where we've been, and where there is room for policy to affect the economy. Where we are right now, when we measure the California economy in terms of employment, which I'm going to argue is the best single way to describe where the economy is today, California's economy actually grew in 2010 and is right now growing slightly faster than the US overall. Of course, this comes at the end of a recession in which California was affected much more than most other states. Employment losses were much greater in 2008 and 2009 than the US overall. The housing bubble crashed much more severely here, resulting in much bigger drops of housing prices and a much higher foreclosure rate than almost any other state. And the unemployment rate, of course, is still at 12%, only modestly below its peak of 12.5%, which is unprecedentedly high in California's recent history. The recovery also, although underway, has been and will continue to be slow. It's likely to be several more years where unemployment is several points above our long-term norm of roughly 6%. And right now, when we compare California's economy to its peak a few years ago, there are 8% fewer jobs in the state today than in the middle of 2007, its highest point. In all of this, there has been little room for California to try to stimulate the economy and hasten the recovery. The reason for that is the recession, of course, was bigger than California. It was rooted in national and global factors. This is true not only for this recession, but also the other major recent downturns in California's history, be it aerospace, high tech, and this time housing. The most recent recessions have all happened more strongly in California because California was more heavily weighted toward those industries that faced national or global crises over the past 20 years. Just as the factors are bigger than California, so are many of the solutions. When we look at what the federal stimulus did and try to apply what California might have done to try to soften the recession and hasten the recovery, think about this. If California had $1 billion to spend on stimulus, which it doesn't, but let's say it did, and somehow we're able to come up with a set of stimulus measures that were 10 times more effective than what the federal stimulus came up with, which we couldn't, but let's say we could. Based on what the federal stimulus did for the national economy, it suggested that $1 billion might lower unemployment by about 0.2 of a percentage point. Now, when you think about where unemployment is today relative to normal, that's a very little room. That is a very small effect that we could have in the short run. But when we look beyond the cyclical fluctuations, which again tend to be largely beyond California's control, it's a different story. When we look at the longer term picture, that's where there really is room for policy to help boost economic development and economic growth in California. So what's happened when we look over the past 10, 20, or 30 years? The story is basically this. Growth in California has basically kept up with the US overall. Employment growth over the past 10, 20, or 30 years has basically kept pace with the national average. Now, if that's the case, why is there so much concern about the business climate in California? Several reasons for this, some better than others. One reason that often comes up in the public debate is looking at the wrong measures. Often the public debate focuses on businesses leaving the state as evidence of problems in California, while our own work has shown very clearly that very few businesses move into or out of California. And if you want to have the best measure of how California is doing, you look at employment overall, not just changes by businesses leaving or coming to California, but overall employment growth. When you look at that, you see that California roughly keeps up with the US. The question then is that good enough? When we compare these recent years, the recent 30 years when California has kept up with the US, with California's heyday in the post-war period, from roughly 1950 to 1980, the most recent 30 years have been a very different picture. From 1950 to 1980, California's growth rate was between 3 and 4% a year on average, way above its growth rate of about 1% a year over the past 30 years, and also considerably above the national average. Now, what happened during this period? Why is growth so much slower today than in the past? Part of the story is that's inevitable. No place can grow fast forever. Places fill up, land gets bid up, labor gets bid up, places get more expensive. That's part of the story. But perhaps the most important part of the story is California could still nonetheless grow faster than it does today. And this is the outcome of recent work that we've done here at PPIC that found that better rankings on business climate indexes that emphasize taxes and costs, in other words, states that do better on measures of having lower taxes and lower costs in doing business, are associated with faster economic growth. California tends to rank poorly on many of these indexes that matter. Now, California nonetheless keeps up with the national average because California also happens to be blessed with natural advantages. Good weather, a mix of industries that tends to grow faster than most industries looking at a national average. These blessings offset some of the negative effects of the business climate in California. It means that California is able to keep up, but with an even better business climate, California would likely outpace the national average. So in the immediate term, there may be little that the state can do to either soften the recession or hasten the recovery. But there is room for economic development policy to take a longer-term view to raise growth in California. And I'm delighted today that Lieutenant Governor Newsom is here to talk more about this. Thanks very much.
So with that, gee, I don't know what to say to that, Jed. I think I'll defer to the lieutenant governor for most of it, but let me, as Richard Nixon said, let me say this. As I look at California, I look at a place which is how many of you started out in California, were born here? Okay, which means how many of you came here from some other place, were drawn here? Gee, quite a few. Why did you come here? I won't ask you to answer the question because, I'm with you. We came here, maybe it was because of that period from 50 to 80, but, maybe it was more than that. This is a place of dreams. This is a place of incredible institutions, of incredible people, of incredible beauty, it's a wondrous place. And the idea, in my mind, that all we could do is maybe keep pace with the rest of the country, I don't think that's the right bar to set, frankly. And I think that, we need to do much, much better. And I believe we can do much, much better. And I think what we're going to hear from the Lieutenant Governor tonight are some ideas about what's happening and how we can do much, much better. But I would strongly urge us as opinion leaders in the community, not to set the bar too low and to really think about California as the place, not what it is or not what it was, but as a place of what it should be, and certainly what I believe what it could be. And it's important that we focus on it that way. Let me introduce Lieutenant Governor Newsom. I mean, he's clearly doesn't need much introduction because we all know him well, and we were all excited to see him become the Lieutenant Governor of our state. Having been the mayor of San Francisco, served on the Board of Supervisors, and then serving as San Francisco mayor from 2003 through 2010. Now, I want to say one thing. A lot of people are saying good things about Ed Lee as mayor. I think he probably made a pretty good choice there. But when Gavin Newsom was mayor, it never rained in May. Never. Okay? And so, no matter what they say about Lee, who I agree is doing a pretty good job, Gavin did a heck of a lot better, and he was much more in control of things when he was mayor than obviously Lee is. So, since moving on to the Lieutenant Governor's office, I think, Gavin is doing, I think, what person who is in the mayor's position in San Francisco, in a place that competes with other places in the state and other parts of the nation, and as a business person who took the job of going into government would do, he's trying to figure out what the best practices are around the country, which are potentially drawing away, whether it is existing businesses which are crossing over the lines, which Jed and PPIC saying isn't happening as much as we think, or just attracting new investment and so forth. He's hard at work doing this. He'll probably touch on his recent trip to Texas and what he learned there, and maybe some other places and so forth. We at the council think this is very, very important work. Just a couple of statistics. According to the Milken Institute, California businesses pay 23% more than the national average to operate here. One of our members, Bain & Company, recently concocted what they call a regulatory hassle index, and it found that California is far worse than any other state to do business by a very significant margin. Last week, a report came out from CEO Magazine. It didn't surprise us very much because it's the same report that came out for each of the previous 6 years, and it rated California by CEOs dead last in the country as a place to do business. Now, this is something that we shouldn't accept. We need to change these attitudes about our state. I think we're just too great a place for this to happen, and we have to take seriously these commentaries, these analyses from various folks who are, in fact, the decision makers about where they're going to invest, where they're going to put their human resources, where they're going to put their capital, and so forth. And so, we've done a lot of good things as a state. And I think we're in very good hands with a person like Gavin Newsom up in Sacramento, who brings a very different attitude to our state capital than a lot of the prevailing attitudes that exist there from folks who've spent quite a bit of time there. And I hope, Gavin, that as you spend more time there, you don't forget too much what you learn from the sort of real life duking it out on the streets of San Francisco in terms of making things really happen where they count for people, whether it's for business or all walks of life, and I'm rather confident that will be the case. So I'd like to introduce the Lieutenant Governor, make some comments, and then Mark will have and he will have a chance for a conversation, and hopefully by the time we get When we leave this historic, first time ever meeting here at the Bechtel Conference Center, we're going to be more informed and ready to go out and do some real business in bringing California up to where it should be. With no further ado, let me introduce the Lieutenant Governor of California, the Honorable Gavin Newsom.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, guys. And thank you all for taking the time to be here. And I am quite appreciative of the opportunity to spend a few moments giving you my overview and assessment of California's economy, where we are and where I hope we can go, and then having the opportunity to dialogue perhaps in more detail and specificity about it. You know, I've long subscribed to Michelangelo's frame, which was that the biggest risk, as Michelangelo asserted, in life was not that we aim too high and miss it, it's that we aim too low and reach it. And I think of that quote in the context of the conversation that was just taking shape, at least the two presentations, that I don't think California aspires to be average. This has always been a state, in Jim's spirit, have been a state of dreamers and doers, of entrepreneurs, of innovators, a state that has prided itself on being on the leading and cutting edge. We are the pace car for not just the rest of the nation, but we have been for the world. And right now, it seems to me, a lot of folks are in denial in the state of California about the economy of this state. Let me underscore what 12% means. It doesn't mean 12% just across the board. It means this. There are 15 counties now, there are 26 counties in the state of California with unemployment north of 15%. 26 counties with unemployment north of 15%. There are 7 counties in this state with unemployment north of 20%. If you're from Imperial or Colusa, now is top of the list, or Madera or Sutter, these unemployment rates are north of 25%. These are Depression-era unemployment numbers. Those are not underemployment statistics. These are the unemployment statistics. And behind those statistics are real suffering and real problems. And what frustrates me as someone that's new to Sacramento is that we are not asserting ourselves, particularly those in power. That includes me as Lieutenant Governor, asserting ourselves on addressing the number one thing ailing the state of California outside the budget, and that's the economy. What happens, and you know this, is every single year, the economy and jobs and economic development get pushed off because we're dealing with this year's budget crisis, which in every previous year going back, it seems to me, even when there was a dot-com boom, has existed, at least over the last decade, notably in 2000, 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we had to spend a little, and then 7, it starts imploding, 8, 9, and here we are in this contraction phase. And the economy gets shortchanged. Now, some would argue, well, again, the economy's turning around, job numbers looked up, and we got to celebrate today, didn't we, a little bit, $6.6 billion of some new good news. But some caution, well, you know, it was a hard thing, right? You're up there as a Democrat, you want to celebrate that and take credit for it. On the other hand, you don't want to take too much credit and too much celebration, because then it gets in the way of the structural problems we have in the state and our desire to extend the existing tax rates and then reinstitute the income tax rate, which just, the surcharge that just expired in January. So it's a difficult moment. But my point is that this state needs to get back in the economic and jobs game. And that means we need to do just 2 fundamental things before we can even start. And that is this. We first need to start with a framework of our assets, our strengths and our weaknesses. We need a dashboard. We need a plan. There is no economic development plan in the state of California. There's nothing that even approximates an economic development plan for the state of California. Now, I'm a small business guy. I've had the privilege of creating 17 businesses. I've done business in 4 or 5 different counties. At our peak, we had about 1,000 employees in this state. I know a thing or two about job creation. This isn't, to me, an academic issue. It's not an abstract issue. One thing I know is in every one of my businesses, we had a plan. It wasn't static. I understand that. Some people say, well, as soon as you get a plan, it collects dust, it's no longer relevant. But at least we had a framework of what our strengths were in terms of our business strategy, and we can adapt to changing environment and update that in a dynamic way. This state needs a plan. And that's exactly, and we hopefully can talk a little bit about this, Mark, this is exactly what I'm doing in my role as chair of the Economic Development Council in the state, is putting together that plan, and we all have a draft plan out in the middle part of July. We've been working on this 5 or 6 months. One of the reasons I went out to Texas and have been to 4 or 5 other states, assessing what their strengths are and weaknesses, as well as academically learning from other states across this country in terms of what their economic development framework is. That's number one. Number two, most importantly, once you have a plan, you actually need to deliver. You got to get in the how business. You actually have to implement strategies to make the plan real. And that's the most important work. Plan's fine, but you actually have to make it real. Right now, arguably, you have 36 agencies in state government that have some responsibility for job creation, job retention, and workforce development. I'll repeat that. There are over 3 dozen agencies responsible. No wonder if you're a small business person, even a big business, you don't know who the heck to call. There is no single agency. Governor Schwarzenegger, to his credit, had a good idea that came too late. And good ideas that come too late oftentimes are referred to as bad ideas. He created an Office of Economic Development, but it was the last 6 months of his term. And as a consequence, it hasn't got much traction. You've gone through a new administration that doesn't even necessarily know what they do. In fact, no one even knew where they were. Good folks, again, trapped in a bad structure, but we didn't aggregate, we did not organize and recalibrate the rest of the delivery system. So it's just another agency costing us more money that actually is frankly getting in the way of job creation. Again, not an assault on the individuals that are there. A good idea but came too late. So we need a complete reorganization of our economic development and workforce training in the state. And that's something we are working on with Speaker Perez. We actually have a bill that is moving forward that will go through this quote-unquote gut and amend process and hopefully end up on the governor's desk by late August and early September to actually create a different framework to deliver on our plan and deliver on a different framework. Just briefly, the plan we are putting together asserts a number of things. That there is no economy in the state. There are different economies in different regions in this state. There are regional economies that are different. This region's economy is very different than the regional economy around Fresno and Stockton. It's different than parts of Southern California. So we want to build on the strengths of these economies in biotech, life science, nanotechnology, digital media, digital arts, green technology, focus on our rural agricultural framework and backbone. And a big part of it is asserting that manufacturing is not part of our economic past, that advanced manufacturing needs to be a central tenet of our economic future. 70% of R&D in this country is in manufacturing. People don't fully appreciate this. California has more manufacturing jobs than any other state in the nation. We don't fully appreciate that. And we're not talking about mom and pop's manufacturing. I was down there today at a manufacturing facility, and there was not one person with any tool outside this one, sitting there on computers doing some of the most sophisticated satellite manufacturing anywhere on the planet. This is another core strength of the state, but we've got to organize around it. And finally, if you're going to have a manufacturing plan, you got to focus on how to support it, which is an export strategy. In 2003, we got rid of our exports strategy in the state by getting rid of our exports office, our trade office. And some will say, well, good riddance, because it got a bad LAO report. I mean, it seems that up in Sacramento, you get a bad this LAO. I didn't know what that meant. Now I'm up there, I get it. Legislative office came and said, hey, well, they're doing junkets. It was like, fair enough. But they threw the whole damn thing out. And in 2003, I can show you 4 or 5 other states that got in the trade and export business at exactly the same time that California decided to drop away. It was of such frustration to me as mayor that we actually opened our own office. San Francisco opened up its trade office, a city, in Shanghai. We just opened our second office in Beijing. I can point, I don't think this, I can point to the companies that simply would not be here, from Yingli Solar to Suntech on down, had we not opened up that office with the strong support of Jim and the Bay Area Council and others, because we asserted ourselves and we made the case of our geographical enhancements, not just warm weather, not just clusters of population or old historic clusters in terms of universities and R&D, but that gateway status, particularly Asia. We went out to the Karnataka region in India and Bangalore area to make a case there. We need to get in Taiwan. What are we doing, of course, in the areas of Brazil and other parts of the globe, not just, and we're proud of their trading partner in Canada, in Japan, in Mexico, but what's our fate and future look like in that interdependence in terms of an exports and trade strategy that can support the manufacturing of goods and services. But we've got to start with a framework of intentionality. We've got to get back in this game. And I'll close with this. You know, nothing is more frustrating. You know, I went to Texas, and we'll get to the details of it, because I was so sick and tired of hearing about Rick Perry this, Rick Perry that. I can give you countless stories of companies that have gotten calls from the governor, only to find out the governor was not our governor. It was their governor, and not just Rick Perry. How many times I go to the airport, I have some friends at the airport, I say, who was in this week? And how many times that Haley Barber, whatever that guy's name is, was coming in to our state. I'm being facetious a little bit, but I mean frustrating. Seriously. Folks are in the business of being aggressive. And you know what, if for nothing else, because we understand this 95+% of job creation in state comes from organic growth creation, from new startups or building, or the Twitter example, right? You start with 15, you have 30, 150, in a few years they'll have 3,000 jobs, supporting their growth. That's why we did that tax credit. And I was the mayor that actually did that. And thank you, Ed Lee, for making it happen with the new Board of Supervisors. There was a reason we did that, to be competitive. That's, I think, smart strategy. You can spend a little too much on the smokestack strategy, the headquarters strategy. And I think, and I would argue, Texas does a little bit of that for show. But they have a lot to back it up in terms of total job creation, because they have intentionality. They have an organizational chart that makes sense. We can talk about what it looks like. They actually have a framework and plan. They have a biotech strategy, very focused biotech strategy. I didn't even realize that competes with the amount of money we're putting into stem cell research in this state. You've got a dozen other states that are aggressive in that field, in that space. In California, again, I think we're just resting on our laurels. It would be nice if you reach your quarterly profits to get a call from the state. This is not, by the way, an attack on Jerry Brown. Quite the contrary. He just got there. Jerry just got there. This is not an attack, and I think everyone's a little sensitive up there sometimes. And they're sensitive to a guy like me coming out on this a little aggressively, that somehow I'm attacking my party. I'm not. We just got there. We're going to fix this. But it's the sense of laissez-faire, this notion of creepy mediocrity that frankly has gotten in the way of this state asserting itself. I don't want to keep making excuses for California. There's no state more uniquely advantaged from an economic development perspective than the great state of California. No state in the world can outcompete California if we get back into the game with some intention, some focus, and some deliberative energy. I'm absolutely confident of that. That's just not some politician trying to give you a little sense of optimism. I'm convinced of that, especially the more I case, quote unquote, other people's joints. The notion of habitually learning from others, what I did as a small business person. And so this is my passion, always has been, and this is what I am spending probably 2/3 to 3/4 of my time in the state capital right now. And I'm honored to be here to be able to talk in a little bit more detail about it. And let me just thank PPIC. This is, you know, there's a lot of myth-making, a lot of politicking in Sacramento. And one of the great things about these reports, PPIC comes out, is it's cold-hearted and in a lightened sense, and analytical, meaning it's not a Democratic report or a Republican report. I mean, there's things in this last report about welfare that may not make Democrats happy. They don't bring that up. About welfare states not actually having as high growth rates because a lot of folks have a disincentive for work. There's other things in there that make you quite happy as a Democrat, saying, you know, it's not just low taxes and low costs that can drive an economy. There's other notions of sense of place. There's those intangibles, productivity advantages and the like. But these are important reports, and I'm just one of those people that's not ideological. And final words, we are never going to solve this conundrum if we're ideological. You've got to be open to argument, interested in evidence, which means Democrats need to spend time with Republicans, and Republicans need to spend time with Democrats. We need to be open to what other people are doing well. And just by showing up, it doesn't mean you agree with everything that's being said, but it means that you're willing to listen and perhaps learn and adopt a strategy that may not be precisely the same strategy, but with your own value orientation can actually add some value and impact the work that you're doing. I felt that way as a small business person. I sure as heck felt that way as mayor. And now as your lieutenant governor, that's my intent as well. So thank you all very much, and I look forward to the conversation.
for joining us today. And thanks to everybody for being here. This is our first public event at our new Bechtel Conference Center. I thank the sponsors. We have one of our sponsors, the Stewart Foundation, here today, who helped fund this speaker series. It was exciting putting together this this program, and we couldn't have a better lead off to our speaker series than having the former San Francisco mayor and the current lieutenant governor here. And I might add, and staff members reminded me, that you were our first visitor during our California 2025 Planning for a Better Future outreach to candidates last year. And also, I might add, a very popular visitor here. Because, you know, I couldn't even get an invitation to the meeting today because, you know, everybody else wanted to sit down with you and have that meeting.
Nice.
We had an hour-and-a-half meeting beforehand to brief Lieutenant Governor on our work on the economy. So let's just start out by going back to the economic development plan for the state that you're working on now. I'm impressed by by the vision of having a state economic plan for a state of our size, and also the ambitions you have of producing one by this summer.
Yeah.
I wish that we had something like that we could produce that quickly, because you just got into office in
Yeah.
January.
Yeah.
So can you give us a sense about what we might expect to see in a few months?
Well, what I didn't want to do is begin at the beginning, because so much work has already been done. There's so many regional plans that already exist in the state, and chambers have put their plans together, manufacturing organizations put their plans together, labor has put their plans together. We have our own local plan here in San Francisco. So what I did is sort of simple. I got everybody's plan, and I read every single plan I could get my hand on. That didn't take more than a couple days, but it was a lot of work to just get those plans. And I started to realize the obvious. 80% of them said the exact same thing. Far right ideological plans, far left ideological plans, 80% said the same thing. I then went to Brookings and McKinsey. I said, you guys have been doing a lot of work, and started to look at some of these national think tanks and some of the work they had done. I'd read all your plans on the enterprise zones, everything I could get, yet local EITC, job tax credits, the whole thing, read through them, went back to some of the old ones as well, 10, 15 years ago, and started to pick up some themes. And I said, well, why start with some task force that goes out and has 100 hearings so we can just end up where we could begin? I'd rather put together a draft plan and then present it and say, here's the plan. This is an organic plan. It's not static. It needs to be, every year needs to be updated. We should have a foundational principle of a way to update it and include people and incorporate strategies. Oregon, as an example, looking at best practices, every year has a big collaborative effort to look at their economic development strategies with nonprofit and labor, looking at the regions, and they all come together around some prescribed agenda about how they can build on that plan. I thought, interesting strategy. And so we have Brookings and McKinsey and others that are helping us draft it. I had to raise a few bucks to get the folks to do this work. And in mid-July, we'll have a very comprehensive draft out there. And we started working with other states. I'm very close with the former mayor of Denver, the former mayor of Baltimore, now both governors, and Maryland and Colorado, former Mayor Rendell of Philadelphia and governor of Pennsylvania. I learned when I was out there that they share an office with Maryland, a foreign office, where they share the overhead and strategies. There are all kinds of extraordinary plans that exist across the state. We started learning what Georgia's doing well. Heck, I even learned about, I didn't know Alabama had best practice. I'll just excuse my own bias. Alabama has some interesting best practices. Louisiana, notably, some interesting. Georgia, that they've collaborated on, not just Texas. And Colorado being one of the most exciting, just because I think there's a dynamic nature to the new governor in terms of the way he's approaching it. And even New York and Governor Cuomo now getting more aggressive in these ways. So we're working with all those states as well, and we'll have something for the governor's consideration.
Fantastic. Well, that's quite an undertaking in the first 6 months, and it sounds like you're off and running.
I hope so.
So I wanted to also come back to your trip to Texas, which was, I think it's safe to say, controversial in some parties.
Yeah.
You got some criticism, particularly among members of your own party
Yeah.
about this.
I'm good at getting criticized.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so why did you go there, and what did you learn? What did you learn that you couldn't have otherwise seen had you not gone?
One thing I learned is they're opening, the Austin Chamber of Commerce is opening an office in Southern California. I certainly didn't know that. I just use that symbolically. That's not substantively what I learned. But that should infuriate every single one of you. Think about that. I mean, can you imagine San Francisco opening an office in Dallas? You say, what the heck are they doing there? Well, they're there because they're what they you know, Governor Perry, love him or hate him, goes on these quote unquote hunting trips. Time for California jobs. Now, you guys have done the work. This is not how to spend disproportionate amount of your time. You're not going to create big net job gains doing this. And if you want to focus and lob all your incentives on headquarters smokestack strategies, you're I think spending way too much money, and you're not getting the results you can that you otherwise could get by focusing on the corpus of your job creation, which again is new startups and supporting existing businesses. But they certainly are in the game. I went there. I went with the Republican caucus. I went with someone, Dan Logue, who, I ran a campaign saying don't mess with California, which was taking off the don't mess with Texas strategy because of Proposition 23 and trying to overturn AB 32, which I think is a godsend for California's economy. And the one that was principally responsible for for Prop 23 was the guy I went out with. I thought that would be appropriate. I might as well spend some time with the person that you could never have imagined even saying hello to, because I think that's important. I learned from other people, and it'd be nice if every Democratic leader went out to Texas. But it's interesting, no one talked about all my other trips because they weren't with the Republicans. Somehow it was wrong for me to go with the Republicans, and that was really unfortunate, and I think goes to the larger issue, the tribal issues up in California right now, us versus them, and again, it's pox on all houses. I mean, it really is, and it's frustrating. I'm a Californian first. I'm the future. I always said I was a future ex-mayor, and I'm now the future ex-lieutenant governor. I'm just a fifth generation Californian, cares deeply about this state, and I want to see it work. And I don't think we have exclusivity to all the right ideas and good ideas. And I saw an organizational chart, to answer your question, in Texas that impressed the heck out of me. A delivery system. I mean, I met with their utility folks and others that were in the economic office. It's the equivalent of having PG&E and some of the other regulatory folks in the state agencies. So when a new business is coming in or starting up, wherever they're doing business, they'll bring everyone to talk about a one-stop shop. It's a moving one-stop shop. You don't have to come to the Capitol. They'll come to you, and you'll meet the local planning folks, you'll meet the local building folks, you'll meet the regional folks, then you'll meet the state folks, and they'll have the federal folks to the extent they have the private sector folks. It's called Texas One, this public-private model that they have. Real intentionality, real focus. Now, end of the day, is that the great differentiator? Maybe not, but as a business person, I kind of like that. Because right now, try to get a phone call returned. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but who do you even call? I'd have a hard time telling you to call. I mean, I really would. I don't know. I'm the chair of the Economic Development Commission. You're supposed to call me. There's not one staffer in my office for this. They eliminated it last year. It's a 17-member commission. It's supposed to do some of this stuff. It's never done any of this stuff. It needs to be eliminated. And by the way, it's one of the few formal functions of Lieutenant Governor, and I'm arguing to get rid of it. That's not an easy thing to do. Because it needs to be centralized under the governor. You're going to have a real economic development strategy. You have to have accountability. It has to go under the governor's office. And what's happened is you've had a lieutenant governor and the governor never getting along, mostly from different parties. And lieutenant governor is chair of this Economic Development Council, so it's always undermined. Thus, the fact Arnold never worked with, the Governor Schwarzenegger never worked with Lieutenant Governor Garamendi, so much so that he eliminated 70% of the budget. I saw someone said there was an op-ed said we'll solve it. I mean, implied we should solve the state's problem by eliminating Lieutenant Governor's office. And I called the guy, said, I think we all but have. You only got 3 folks there. It's not a huge cost overhead, but God bless you for your spirit of condemnation. And I get it. Just give me some time. Give me a year, and I'm going to try to prove you wrong. But I understood the instinct. So we got to aggregate those strategies, got to get in the house business. A big part of the plan will be regionalism, focusing on cluster strategies, workforce alignment, and really trying to connect dots in terms of the workforce partnerships between community college, CSU system, and UC systems. Again, exports strategy. I believe in manufacturing. I'm going to support it aggressively. And then my bias, and I think it's Governor Brown's bias, so I'm playing into that a bit, and this I will argue is a more subjective analysis, but it's based on some foundational facts, is the green tech space. I do think it's an interesting fact, Mark, and no one really talks about this. You know, San Francisco created its own local global climate action plan. We've already rolled back our greenhouse gas emissions 7% below 1990 levels. We achieved that in 2008, which is in essence what Kyoto called for. America moved away from Kyoto. Democrats and Republicans unanimously moved away. People forget that. We love to blame Bush because he didn't restart the negotiations. But it was under the Clinton administration that Senate voted 95-0 to reject Kyoto, Democrats and Republicans, because we didn't think we could grow our economy and reduce our greenhouse gases. Interesting quick fact, there are 44 wealthy nations that signed Kyoto. There are 4, I don't know why we're not talking about this, 4 that actually reached Kyoto. Of course, United Kingdom, Denmark, Germany, and Sweden. Interestingly, all of them have, before Lehman Day, September 18th, 2008, before the macroeconomics collapsed around the world, had higher growth rates than the United States of America. They had lower unemployment and higher, or rather more important than anything, they had lower income inequality because of the number of businesses created, because they dramatically changed the way they produced and consumed energy. I am a firm believer that moving our economy in this direction is a significant boost to our economic fate and future. And you're seeing that just in the last, I mean, you've seen since 1995, green jobs have grown 56%, the economy about 18%. You saw the last numbers from 08 to 09, green jobs growing 3 times the rate of the overall economy. This is real. Venture capital, disproportionate benefits, VC. If we're going to look, we've looked at the boom bust, right? The aerospace defense boom bust in the late 80s, then we bust in the early 90s, and we saw IT boom bust late 90s, and then 2000 we suffered. I mean, what's the next boom for California? How are we orienting ourselves, I mean, even broadly in that boom? So we can address, of course, the bust cycle, but how do we even have the benefits? Otherwise, again, we'll just be plopping along at 1.2 versus 1.1% in terms of job creation vis-a-vis the United States. That's the stats that PPIC just came out with, which is a big deal. We were at 3.7 in 1950 to 1980. You heard that number, versus the national economy at 2.2%. We were growing dramatically faster. And then during the boom cycles, we grew even faster. Of course, during the bust, we declined. But my point is, this is an area of opportunity for this state, and AB 32 is a godsend in terms of setting a regulatory framework that I think will dramatically advance our efforts to shift our economy around the consumption and production of energy.
Fantastic. Wanted to ask you about the big news event of today for California, which was the budget.
Donald Trump not running. Oh, sorry.
Well,
Sorry.
I didn't think about
Yeah, no,
that
it
one.
was not as exciting.
Not quite as exciting.
Yeah, no.
But let's talk about the budget and the economy and what your view is of the budget plan that the governor has proposed, and how important is it that we resolve our budget issues sooner rather than later.
I completely support the governor's focus. And, you know, one could critique it's not a multitasked focus. It's just we're going to get this budget done. And that's what I'm going to focus my energy and attention on. And everything else is going to get not necessarily pushed back, but it's not going to get that kind of attention. And I think there's wisdom to that because what's at stake. And I think the governor's absolutely right, and I think the legislative leaders are right, certainly on my side of the aisle, the Democratic side, that if you want to get serious about structural reform, just putting your head in the sand and denying that we don't have a structural problem is not going to get us out of this predicament. And that while we had $6.6 billion in good news, it does not necessarily portend that, again, structurally, that will alleviate the stress from these deficits a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. So I support the governor's plan and his framework. I think the Democrats have proven themselves to make the most difficult of choices. I mean, the things we cut a few years ago, we were the first to critique Governor Schwarzenegger for cutting. Think about just the Medi-Cal cuts. We sued. San Francisco joined in on one of those lawsuits on an amicus brief, suing Schwarzenegger for these draconian cuts that, interestingly, the Democrats just supported an almost roughly equivalent amount. I mean, these are things just 24 months ago Democrats could have never imagined doing. Yet they've done. We've proven that we can make those tough choices. And I think what we need to see now is that demonstration from my friends on the other side of the aisle that they're willing to make some tough choices to address these structural woes, because if we don't, community colleges will continue to erode, not just your K through 12. And by the way, I know, Prop 98, the headlines are somehow education gets solved today, but don't be misled by that. It just, Prop 98 takes half that damn money roughly and puts aside. It hardly is not all the money we owe them, and it's not enough, and that goes portionally to K through 12, K through 14, excuse me. It's community college gets some benefit there. But it's the UC and CSU systems that are still going to get clobbered in this scenario. And the Health and Human Service side of this has taken some big hits. And I don't know how much more we can sustain. At the same time, I agree with the Republicans that we need to get back in the business of job creation. And so what I'm trying to do is offer a parallel, a plan, and a deliberativeness. And that's why July, yes, why July. I felt like there was some complementary approach to July, that we reach a point where we get some framework of a budget deal, and then we can move to the next most important topic, again, the alien economy and jobs, where we can start building some trust, start building some alignment, and start focusing on these big unemployment pockets in the state in a much more dynamic and dramatic way. So I support what the governor's doing, and I think he continues to impress me sincerely. And I'm a guy who can be, I'm a good critic about my own performance and others. But I'm impressed by by what he's done so far.
So as Lieutenant Governor, you're now sitting on the UC Regents and the Cal State trustees. And you mentioned the higher ed budget and how that's being impacted by the overall budget situation. Tell me what your thoughts are about what the role of higher education is in terms of our economy in the state, and how should we be handling the higher ed budget during this time?
I think most objective observers would acknowledge that California's greatest strength is its strength and concentration of human capital, people. There's a productivity advantage of being here in California because we've always been able to retain and recruit the best and the brightest, not just from around this country, but around the world. And it's been our institutions of higher learning that have anchored that capacity. And what we've seen in the last decade is a tripling. It's not a doubling. I keep reading these old stats. We've tripled these tuitions and fees in these institutions. And what we're doing is pricing out the middle class. We're not necessarily, it was interesting, I always see a lot of protests and people saying, I can't get in. And usually folks, a lot of folks I meet say, well, wait, Pell Grants and Cal Grants will more than cover these increases. You're going to be covered. But it's the folks that oftentimes aren't there protesting that silently are being eroded and degraded in terms of their capacity access. And those are the folks just making a little over $75,000, $77,000, these families of four, which is hardly, it doesn't buy you a Rolls Royce, but it also used to buy you an education, a Rolls Royce education. It doesn't anymore in California. And that's serious. And so as you have this growing income inequality, which to me is the most significant challenge this state and our nation faces, democracy faces, fundamentally. If you don't have a vital center, you have what you get around the rest of the world. Anyone who's traveled to the Philippines or elsewhere, and you've got folks with machine guns in front of shopping centers, that's what you get. And that's kind of dismissive, but I love the Philippines. But I'm just saying, when you see that disparity of income in countries around the world, where there's the haves truly and the have-nots, and there's no vital center, you have democracy that's challenged. And I am concerned that's what's happening in this state and our country. And so education's that great equalizer, not for women yet. This is a huge issue. Women's attainment in the last 40 years in education has far outpaced men, but there's still remarkable wage disparity. This is a fundamental issue that needs to be addressed, and we are not seriously addressing the gender disparities in this country, which to me is an economic indicator and an important part of any economic development strategy, which, by the way, we're including in our plan. Not just race, but gender. So I'm concerned about this. Now, I made a mistake. I think Carla may have written one of the headlines, and I would have too if I were in her position. Remember when I first got there, I said something about that original cut that Governor Brown was doing, and I think it was Newsom rips Brown or something was the headline. It didn't go over so well up in the Capitol.
It was a good headline, though.
It was good. I don't know if it was hers or someone else's, but I made some comments about my concern. With a quick $1 billion cut, and we actually went forward with that cut, rather quietly. We don't get to, I was joking with one of my colleagues at the CSU board meeting last week. I said, everyone else gets to sue, and the threat of a lawsuit keeps you from getting cut. Look at the May revise. Look what didn't get cut, Prop 10. Got revised because of lawsuits. Medi-Cal, we're still in that lawsuit. I told you about the amicus brief in '08. We're at the Supreme Court. We're suing. So all these cuts, you can't necessarily bank them. You got to keep revising them. There's your structural problem, smoke and mirrors. Higher ed, take that to the bank. I was sort of joking, maybe we have to organize a lawsuit, some maintenance of efforts. I'm not being literal, but figurative. Or someone said, you know what we should do? This is not my idea, but I thought it was pretty powerful. To wake folks up, truly it's not my idea. Just all the cuts be on athletics only. And then everyone goes completely crazy. You mean the Pac-10, what? ESPN folks go outraged, every contract television. Then you have every, soccer dad and mom, everyone, what the hell is happening in higher education? Because right now it just seems like people are like, okay, another $500 million on the table. Something to wake folks up, this pattern interrupt we need. But my biggest fear right now is I'm going to be at the meeting tomorrow here at UCSF, and we'll be coming up just like when Chancellor Reed threw out, here's a 32% increase again if we see another $500 million cuts. Right now, in the absence of a deal on the budget, any tax extension, I think that most likely will happen. And that's unacceptable. And this time, I'm not ripping Governor Brown. I'll be ripping the status quo when I say with much more assertion tomorrow and the next day and in subsequent days that enough. This is serious. We are crushing our capacity to get back on our feet as an economy. We cannot continue to see this diminution of higher education. This is serious stuff. We are playing with fire. This is real. And this cannot be allowed to continue. And by the way, Republicans I talk to, almost without exception privately, agree 1,000%. That's what's so frustrating. If we just had folks that had their private thoughts made public, this state would be back on track and we all be getting along. But it's amazing what happens when we get outside our tribes and you have to say something your base doesn't agree with and then you're completely crushed. And that's the threat up there. It's the institutional power, not the political power, but the institutional power that's really, in so many respects, disproportionately driving this train called California, our governance.
Let me ask you one last question. As a former mayor of San Francisco, a lot of mayors and local officials around California have not been too pleased with the part of the governor's plan that involves state and local realignment, specifically redevelopment agencies, enterprise zones. What's your thought? How do you weigh these things, and how does it fit with the economic development plan that you are considering?
Well, I think you made a good decision today on enterprise zones. Men don't end, and I think you guys aided that debate. And I'm not just patronizing you. I've said that to everyone else even before I was here. So thank you. Redevelopment, look, San Francisco is built on redevelopment. If you think I exaggerate, I mean, literally, this city wouldn't have Moscone. There'd be no Transbay Terminal project right now. I mean, we wouldn't be talking about the work that's finally taking shape in Bayview Hunters Point, work that will be done soon in Treasure Island, work that's being done around Mid-Market, some of our residual redevelopment focused planning that was done that helped aid the discussion around not just Twitter, but a whole new strategy in the Mid-Market corridor, which came from the work that was done in the redevelopment agency. And so I'm concerned about it. And I've expressed that privately and trying to, again, be a team player, learning how to be a lieutenant governor. And I'm fearful because it seems to me this is still, it looks to be completely eliminated. And there will be an impact because there are places that do it very well and places that do it lousy, horrible examples. And what happens is when folks are taking advantage and not doing the right thing, they just gut this whole thing for everybody else. And you made that point with enterprise zones too. There were some ways enterprise are working for net new jobs, all these things. And so I hope there's a more, I don't want to say sophisticated because that could be misinterpreted, but I hope there is some third way thinking on this because it's one of the few tools you have as a municipality. We don't have any. Without the enterprise zones and redevelopment, what do you have to compete? You really don't have many things. And you got to allow this competition, this regional competition, which I think is very healthy. And so you need tools in that toolbox. And so if there's a successor agency, we need to design the successor agencies in a very thoughtful way. And I know that the governor's office is having much more specific and substantive conversations around that. And I think that's a healthy thing. And I hope whenever we have a deal that the successor agencies will be appropriately empowered to deliver.
Well, I'm glad I asked that question. I really only have one other. Can you stay around a little bit longer? Because
yeah.
we didn't have time for an audience Q&A tonight.
Yeah.
I want to,
I'm
mindful of the time.
I'm
And
Lieutenant
so-
Governor. I've got all the time you need.
All right. So let me thank the Lieutenant Governor, Jim, and Jed for being part of the program tonight. And let's give a big round of applause to our Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks. Thanks,
And
Mark.
we can continue the conversation in this room or next door, but feel free to stop and ask the governor, Lieutenant Governor. some questions.
Or you have a question?
Do you have a pressing question or two? Or
I'm
you-
happy to take
no?
any, and anyone
If-
has to
if
go.
everybody
leave.
else has, let's ask
Yeah.
a couple of questions.
Fabulous presentation.
I see.
For 26 years, I helped get NUMMI going, and unfortunately, it closed on me last year. And since you were in Texas, my question is this, because one of our two lines, the truck line, went to Texas. Did they tell you at all why it went to Texas?
Yeah, I didn't. I don't know specifically. No, I didn't have that conversation. But look, the folks I taught, we met a lot of businesses that left, and people that lived out here and that moved, particularly to Austin. I mean, the state capital's in Austin, which, if you're going to be in Texas, I would argue, if anything can approximate. How do I say this in a way that doesn't get
That's right. You don't want to be quoted on
misinterpreted?
this, right?
Austin's a wonderful place. I mean, it really is, subjectively. Look, they have higher property taxes in California, substantially higher. I mean, from a business perspective, just a raw business perspective, it's not that great a place to do business. It's not a cheap business environment, but you pay no income tax. And if you're an LLC or an S-Corp and it's passed through, you're loving that as a CEO or a shareholder. And that's the big advantage they are selling. Now, that's come at a huge price. They have a $27 billion, they have 2-year budgets. They roughly have a $27 billion plus or minus. They say 25, 27, it will change like ours changes. They have a huge problem. They have a ton of incentives. And the big issue right now in Texas is whether or not those incentives are going away, because they're going to have to start pulling those dollars. There's not many places to go there. They can't keep raising those property taxes. They're 2+ times higher than California. Their corporate taxes are not completely inexpensive. They have some good universities. They're starting cluster strategies. They've learned some lessons from California and elsewhere. But they sell a fast-track regulatory environment, and they sell limited issues in terms of litigation. They really promote their tort reforms, for better or for worse. I'm not arguing for them, against, I'm just saying they argue that. And they argue their lack of CEQA and other related issues. Now, I believe in CEQA. I'm not going to fight against the 8-hour workday and these things. These things I value. That's why everyone got panicked when I went out there. They thought, oh, that's why he's going. It's not why I was going. Look, Germany is a high-cost, highly regulated economy, and they do 20% of their GDP in manufacturing. We're at about 11.5. You can compete in a high labor cost environment and regulatory environment with some intentionality. We don't need to walk away from the things we've fought for and still be in the game. We don't need to be like Texas in that respect. But the fact is, Texas has dramatically increased the number of jobs vis-a-vis any other state in this nation in the last few years. Just a fact. And I know it grates them. It grates me. They also have low housing costs, and we talked about that today. It's a huge driver. Because you can get, instead of a $50,000 job, you get paid $40,000 and feel like you just got a $100,000 raise coming from San Francisco to Texas. And you got a big backyard, you got a dog, you got a place for 5 kids. And that's just something we're going to have to, fundamentally, I was saying, if this economy with 12% unemployment hasn't, this is about, I don't know, outside of major earthquakes, I don't know that we can get that much lower unless we build that much more. And then you got to start getting into density issues, not sprawl. You got to deal with transportation, housing linkages. I would argue in favor of, some strategies for that. SB 375 and others are strategies. But those are reasons people tend to want to be there.
We have a question from the middle of the room somewhere. We'll take one more.
Thanks a lot for coming to talk to us. My question was, after your economic development plan gets published in July, what the next steps and timing would be?
Well, we're gonna get the plan out there. We're going to, I mean, first and foremost, I want it to be enthusiastically embraced from a diverse constituency up and down the state. That is going to be the greatest challenge. I've tried to be as inclusive as possible without getting in, in the way of a fast-track timeline, and most people are, I think, understanding of that. Second, whenever we get it, I want to make the point it's not perfect. It's not supposed to just be a laundry list of every damn thing that gets in the way of anything getting done. That it is a dynamic document, and that we have to have a framework to update it and build on it and support it on a consistent basis. And the most important way to do that is to create some agency in city government that's responsible for its implementation. And that Governor Brown is going to do this anyway, but he has to do it, in my estimation, and he's intent on doing it, to create a job czar, to create positions in government that are responsible for retention strategy. We used to, Governor Wilson had these strike teams, interesting model. There was more regional collaboration in the history of our state in terms of aligning regionalism. But one thing I know, and I think, Jim, you understand this, whatever we do, we have to connect the dots with the cities and counties. Because every county, the 58 counties, 470 plus cities that have different boards of supervisors and city councils. And as a guy who's done business in all these counties, it's great if the state gets their act together, but if that local building inspector doesn't care, that creates another regulatory burden or hurdle and makes the environment in California unfriendly. So we've got to connect all these regions. So the next step is how we could take that plan to support our regions, support these clusters, and support our cities and counties, and create some alignment and connective tissue so that there's a real frame and reference up that chain or down that economic development chain. That's critical.
If I can ask, over what period of time do you see that taking place?
Well, I hope to have that by the end of the year.
Okay, by the end of 2011.
This year. I mean,
All right.
this is so we overcomplicate everything. Life is so much more simple than we give it credit, and I think we've got Speaker Perez has been fabulous on this, and he wants to get this new agency moving. And the governor, I think, does as well. Again, he's just needs a budget deal. And then we'll hit the ground running on all these things.
Let's take a question from this side.
My question is specific on two items
Wanna
that you talk a little bit
introduce
about.
yourself? I should
One
have
is
asked.
foreign trade, and the other one is taxes, of course. And when you were a mayor, you did a really great job of making San Francisco very visible to China and so forth. But I start noticing Texas has been getting more money and investment and also more exports, specifically to the Asian countries. What is your plan as a lieutenant governor for foreign trade?
Well, nothing frustrates me more. You know, I stole the idea of opening an office in China from the mayor of Chicago, or at least the one up till noon today, since they changed mayors. Everybody gets this, but no one's better positioned than California. I mean, from a demographic perspective, from a geographic perspective, from a port perspective, an infrastructure perspective. I mean, what a godsend. And so what they've done is they've gotten in this game. I mean, when Pennsylvania, Maryland, I mean, I can't count them. I don't know that there's a state that doesn't understand the opportunities. I mean, Jeb Bush understood it back in Florida and others. They were aggressive in terms of their Asia strategies. And we've kind of rested on our laurel. I told you, in 2003, we shut down all those offices and we pulled back. When everyone else was asserting themselves, reconciling this, world is flat, global interdependence, no borders, all these things. And so I hope what we need, and Jim's been unbelievable, Barry Council on this, is, we did China SF. We're going to do China California. And we don't need general fund money for this. And by the way, the whole consolidation strategy is to reduce the cost of government to create a new economic development agency. You don't have to increase the cost of government to do any of these things. And I, by the way, we have these incentives we're starting to do, sales tax. We're getting ahead of ourselves because we don't have a plan. It's ready, fire, aim. So everyone's kind of figuring out, well, here's my incentives, but no one's got what are we trying to achieve? That's why I want to get this done quickly so we can at least, all right, here's what we're trying. Now let's look at our incentive strategy. And we can measure it as opposed to here's our incentives, and then we figure out, well, that's not what we ever wanted to do in the first place. But China is an obvious one. India is an obvious one. Asia, broadly speaking, is an obvious one. Central America, South America is self-evident. California has not been in the exports game, even though we are exporting more. We had a good year last year. We have a president with an exports council. We have a president with a 5-year exports plan to double exports. You can't do that without California's leadership. So California is now, we're working with the Competitiveness Council and the president on our plan, which we're excited about as well, and they're excited about it. And China's going to be a big part of that. And I see it. I see this as I think Jim does, as this is, you remember Japan in the 80s, in some respects good and bad, but Southern California took the lion's share of a lot of the partnerships and job creation. And that's why we decided China for Northern California, but this needs to be a California strategy for the entire state, and we're going to get aggressive in that respect.
Fantastic. As I mentioned earlier, well, we were sitting waiting to get up and speak. You picked a great topic as Lieutenant Governor to focus on, great timing, and we all wish you the best.
Appreciate that, Mark. Thank you all very much. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, everybody. I want to recognize Mark and Jed, PPIC, for the great work that you always do and putting this forum together and leading with the Lieutenant Governor. I thought it was a great discussion. When you were mayor, Gavin, you came to town, to the office, one of the things you focused on, and you sort of touched on it a moment ago, was the systems of government that actually make things work in the city. And a lot of folks, when you talked about those things, didn't think you could really do that in San Francisco, but you made a huge difference just by focusing on the way government can perform. And you've recognized some of the challenges, and it'd be interesting to see that kind of focus, I think, going forward. The talk makes us hopeful because you referenced in the past, we haven't had a lieutenant governor and a governor from the same party. So it's been, they've rubbed up in the wrong way against each other, and the recommendations of the lieutenant governor in this area has been seen largely as a threat. And that isn't going to be the case, I hope, or think this time. And so, the things that you're talking about are very, very encouraging, to we who represent the business community, I think other communities, that we can really get our act together around these areas and begin to go out and make California what it can be again. So thank you very much for being here, and we appreciate the attendance of all of you, and we'll have some further conversation, I think, out in the hall. Thanks
Thanks,
everybody
Jim.
for coming.
Thank you, guys. Thanks again, everybody.